It was just $1 missing from my paycheck, but to a woman raising 2 kids alone, that dollar meant the world. People laugh when I say that, like I'm being dramatic. But when you're living paycheck to paycheck, a single dollar can mean a loaf of bread, a gallon of milk, or even the bus ride your kid needs to get to school. I remember the exact moment I noticed it. I was sitting at the kitchen table late at night, the kids finally asleep, their little bodies curled up under blankets I'd bought secondhand. I had my pay stub in one hand and a calculator in the other. The math didn't add up. I knew what I'd worked, down to the hour. I knew what I'd earned in tips. But there it was, short. $1 missing. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. Maybe the payroll system had a glitch, maybe someone typed the wrong number. I shrugged it off at first, because in my head, I thought, it's just $1. But that little voice inside me whispered something different. If they can steal 1, they can steal 100. The next week, I checked again. Another $1 missing. Sometimes 2. Sometimes more. At the time, I was working at a family-style restaurant in the middle of town. You know the kind, red vinyl booths, sticky laminated menus, kids running around with crayons, the smell of fried food stuck in your clothes long after your shift ended. For me, it wasn't just a job, it was survival. I'd walk in every day with my apron tied tight, hair pulled back, smile plastered on my face, ready to serve tables like nothing in my life was wrong. But behind that smile, I was drowning. My rent was late, my car was breaking down, and my kids were always growing out of their shoes faster than I could buy new ones. The restaurant was busy on weekends, packed with families celebrating birthdays or old couples splitting meals to save money. I'd rush from table to table, balancing trays on my arms, remembering drink orders without writing them down. Customers saw me as just another waitress, but inside, I carried the weight of 2 children and a life that felt like it could collapse any second. My boss, Mr. Randall, was one of those men who thought smiling made him charming. He was in his 50s, balding, with a stomach that showed he never skipped dessert. He liked to say we were a family at the restaurant, but his version of family was one where he sat at the head of the table taking the biggest slice, while the rest of us fought over scraps. Be grateful you have a job, he'd say when anyone complained about hours or pay. There are 100 people lined up behind you. I swallowed my pride every time he said it. Because he wasn't wrong. Jobs in our town were scarce, and everyone knew it. I couldn't afford to get on his bad side. Not when my kids depended on me. But still, I kept noticing. Week after week, the numbers never added up. Some nights, after the kids went to bed, I'd sit with a notebook and write down every shift, every hour, every tip. I became my own accountant, even though I barely understood payroll systems. I just knew something wasn't right. And yet, I didn't speak up. Not then. Fear had a way of tying my tongue. I thought, what if I lose my job? What if I complain and they cut my hours? The truth was, I was already stretched thin. My morning started at 6 a.m. packing lunches, rushing the kids to school, then racing to the diner by 8. I'd work until 3, run home, help with homework, throw dinner together, and then head back for the night shift sometimes. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. But through it all, I told myself, this is temporary. Just hold on a little longer. Something better will come. It never did. The attraction, the hook of my story, wasn't just the missing dollar. It was the way that dollar lit a fire in me. For the first time in years, I felt a shift inside. I wasn't just tired, or scared, or hopeless. I was angry. Because that dollar wasn't just money. It was food out of my children's mouths. It was dignity ripped from my hands. And deep down, I knew, if I didn't fight back now, I'd be teaching my kids the wrong lesson, that people could walk all over you, and you just smile and take it. But before I could get there, before I could rise up and fight, I had to sink lower than I ever thought possible. That winter was brutal. The heat in our apartment barely worked, and I'd pile blankets on the kids at night. My son, Caleb, was 9 at the time. My daughter, Lily, was 7. They were good kids, never complained, but I saw the way they looked at me when I said, "We can't afford that," for the 100th time. One night, Caleb came home from school with a permission slip for a field trip. $10. Just $10. And I didn't have it. I told him I'd try to get it by the deadline, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. That night, as I checked my pay stub again and saw $2 missing, I broke down. I put my head on the kitchen table and sobbed. Because it wasn't just money. It was memories my kids wouldn't get to have, chances they'd miss, because I was too poor to give them more. And that was when the thought hit me, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe they really are stealing from me. And maybe I can do something about it. That was the beginning. The missing dollar was the spark. But I had no idea then how far that spark would take me, into fights I never imagined, risks that terrified me, and a kind of justice that would change not just my life, but the lives of everyone I worked with. Because sometimes, it takes losing almost everything to realize your worth. And I was about to learn, $1 at a time, just how much I was worth. After that night at the kitchen table, I couldn't ignore it anymore. $2 missing. $3 missing. Every week, more and more. It wasn't just careless bookkeeping, it was deliberate. And every time I saw my kids staring at me, hoping I could fix things, I felt a fire inside that I hadn't felt in years. I started keeping a small notebook in my apron pocket. Every hour I worked. Every tip I collected. Every shift I covered for someone else. I wrote it all down, like some secret ledger that only I would see. I double-checked the numbers against my pay stubs. Every time, the math didn't lie. They were stealing from me, bit by bit, thinking I wouldn't notice. At first, I was scared. Scared of losing my job, scared of being labeled a troublemaker. I'd been a good employee my whole life, quiet, diligent, never late, never complaining. But fear has a way of disappearing when you have children depending on you. My fear was small compared to theirs. Some mornings, I'd leave the apartment and watch my kids through the window as they waited for the school bus. Caleb would always wave goodbye, backpack slung over one shoulder, and Lily would run back inside for the 1000th time, hugging her stuffed animal. I hated that I couldn't give them more. They deserved better. And suddenly, that missing dollar became a symbol of everything wrong in my life. At work, I began observing. The managers would write off hours, adjust tips, and shuffle money in ways that seemed innocent, but I noticed patterns. A coworker who left early but got paid full. Me, staying late, covering extra tables, and losing dollars from my tips. I started to realize something else too, I wasn't alone. Other women, single moms, college students, dads supporting families, were quietly suffering the same way. They were afraid to speak up, scared to rock the boat. And like me, they buried their frustration under fake smiles and polite thank yous when the managers handed out their paychecks. The emotional toll was brutal. Some nights, after my kids were asleep, would sit and cry quietly. Not just about the money, but about the helplessness. About the endless cycle of working so hard and still coming up short. About the bills stacking up, the fridge half empty, the car that wouldn't start. I remember one particularly rough night. I had to decide whether to pay the electricity bill or buy groceries. I chose groceries. That night, the apartment was dark, candles flickering, and the kids asked why the lights were off. I told them it was just a power-saving thing, but inside I felt like a failure. Every missing dollar from my paycheck had pushed me into that corner. It wasn't just money. It was my dignity. My self-worth. My ability to protect my family. And that realization made me angrier than I had ever been. Slowly, my anger began to change into determination. I started talking quietly to coworkers I trusted. "Have you noticed your paycheck?" I asked. And often, their eyes would widen. They had noticed too. Some were too afraid to do anything. Others, like me, were quietly fuming, realizing they'd been taken advantage of for months, even years. I began keeping meticulous records, spreadsheets, written logs, even photos of the time clock and notes from shifts. It was obsessive. My little notebook turned into a small binder, which grew heavier every week. Every dollar stolen became a tiny act of rebellion, proof that I could fight back, even if no one believed me yet. At home, the kids noticed changes too. I was quieter sometimes, lost in my notebook. But they also noticed a spark I hadn't felt in a long time. One afternoon, Lily tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, why do you write in that book every night?" I smiled, forcing calm into my voice. "I'm just keeping track of things, sweetie. Nothing for you to worry about." But the truth was, everything was for them. Every page I wrote, every hour I tracked, every late-night calculation, it was all so I could fight for them, for their future. Work became a delicate balancing act. I had to pretend everything was normal while quietly gathering evidence. I couldn't let Mr. Randall see the fire building inside me, or he would crush it before it could grow. Some days, I'd feel a surge of anger as I served him his coffee with a fake smile, thinking about all the stolen dollars. I imagined a different kind of satisfaction, standing up to him, making him accountable. But for now, I had to be patient. The fight wasn't yet ready. The spark was there, but the fire was just beginning. The turning point, I realized, wouldn't be just about a paycheck. It would be about dignity. About justice. About showing my kids, and every other person in that restaurant, that you don't have to accept being treated unfairly, no matter how powerless you feel. And that realization brought a strange kind of peace, even in the middle of struggle. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was someone who could act. Someone who could reclaim what was mine. But little did I know, the path ahead would be harder than I ever imagined. Threats, intimidation, and fear awaited. The very people who stole from me would try to silence me. And yet, I had already crossed the first line. I had noticed. I had documented. I was no longer invisible. It was the coldest morning of the year when I realized I could no longer ignore what was happening. The heater in our apartment had stopped working completely, and the landlord's vague promises meant we were just another name on a long list of complaints. Caleb shivered under his thin blanket, and Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit, looking up at me with eyes too old for her 7 years. I had skipped breakfast myself, trying to stretch what little we had. I counted every penny in my wallet, knowing that if I spent it on breakfast for me, the bus fare for the kids might go unpaid. And that missing dollar, the first one that had started this whole chain of events, still haunted me. At that moment, I snapped. I slammed my hand on the counter and let out a frustrated scream, the kind that shakes a room. I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of being taken advantage of. I'm done. The day at work, I could barely focus. Mr. Randall barked orders, ignored my extra hours, and smiled smugly when I politely questioned the discrepancy in my paycheck again. "It's just a small mistake, honey. Don't worry about it." But it wasn't small. It never had been. I realized that if I kept quiet, I wasn't just letting him steal money, I was teaching my kids that you could be cheated, bullied, and silenced. That lesson would echo for years if I didn't act. So I decided. I would act. I started quietly reaching out to coworkers. Some were scared. They whispered about losing their jobs, about how the boss could retaliate. But a few others, single moms like me, college students, and a dad trying to keep his family afloat, were willing to share their stories. We met in the back of the restaurant after shifts, huddled over coffee, sharing pay stubs, tips, and hours. It was terrifying to think that we were risking our livelihoods, but we all felt the same fire burning inside. We were finally seeing ourselves not as powerless employees, but as people who deserved justice. Meanwhile, at home, the pressure kept building. One evening, Caleb came home with a scraped knee from recess. I couldn't afford the bandages at the pharmacy, so I had to improvise with what we had. I held him close and whispered, "I promise, I'm going to fix this. I'll fix everything." That promise wasn't just a lie to calm him, it was a vow to myself. I had to fight. I had to prove that even in a world that constantly underestimated women like me, we could rise, push back, and reclaim what was ours. The breaking point came one Friday night. I had worked 2 shifts back to back, nearly 20 hours in a single day. Exhausted, I checked my paycheck one last time before going home, and there it was, $3 more missing. It didn't matter how tired I was. It didn't matter that my body ached and my feet were swollen. I couldn't take it anymore. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a kind of righteous anger I hadn't felt since I had kids. I stared at that stub, and I made a decision: I'm not afraid anymore. If they want a fight, I'll give them one. That weekend, I started organizing my binder, turning my careful notes into a formal record. Every shift, every tip, every deduction. I even recorded conversations and kept photos of clock-in sheets. My apartment looked like a war room, papers everywhere, colored pens, sticky notes, spreadsheets. I was planning a battle I didn't fully understand, but I knew I couldn't back down. I remember thinking about the irony. A missing dollar had started it all. That tiny thing, worth nothing to the boss, was the thing that made me realize my own worth. It was small, but it had a power I couldn't ignore. By the next week, I approached a trusted coworker. If we do this together, we can make them listen, I said. She hesitated but eventually agreed. Together, we started quietly talking to others, forming a small alliance. Fear still lingered, but anger was stronger. I could see it in the mirror at night, looking at my tired, worn face. Something had changed. The woman who had cried over a missing dollar was gone. In her place stood someone ready to fight, not recklessly, but strategically, fiercely. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat in the dark apartment, binder in my lap. I whispered to myself, it's not just about money anymore. It's about respect. It's about dignity. And it's about proving to my children that their mother will never let them be cheated, no matter what. I had crossed the line from fear into action. And once that line is crossed, there's no turning back. The following week, I realized that anger alone wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan. One missing dollar had sparked a fire, but fighting a powerful boss required more than just passion. It required proof, strategy, and allies. I spent that Sunday morning at the kitchen table, surrounded by my binder, pay stubs, and a stack of notebooks. Each page detailed hours worked, tips earned, and discrepancies I had uncovered over months. I color-coded everything, drew charts, and highlighted patterns. Every dollar stolen became a small victory in my mind, proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining things. The first person I approached formally was Maria, a fellow waitress who had been working at the restaurant longer than I had. She was hesitant at first, shaking her head and whispering, "I can't risk it, not with bills like mine." I took a deep breath. "Maria, I get it. I really do. But if we don't do something, they'll keep stealing from all of us. And one day, it won't just be dollars, it'll be hundreds, thousands. Don't you want your paycheck to actually be yours?" She looked at me, eyes filled with fear, but also that glimmer of hope. Finally, she nodded. "Okay. I'm in. But what do we do?" And just like that, the alliance began. We met in secret after shifts, comparing pay stubs and recounting hours worked. Slowly, others joined. By the end of the week, a small group of 5 employees, mostly women, some single parents, a few students, were committed to standing up. Each of us shared stories of missing money, of small injustices ignored for years. It was a strange, quiet kind of courage that grew in those moments. Alone, we were just employees, afraid to speak. Together, we were something else, a team with evidence, witnesses, and a shared sense of justice. Next, I reached out to a local labor attorney I had researched online. I was terrified. What if they laughed at me? What if the boss fired me before anything could happen? I remember dialing the number, hands shaking, heart pounding. "Hi, my name is. I think I need help. My employer has been stealing from me and my coworkers for months. There was a pause on the other end. Then, tell me everything, and don't leave anything out. For the first time, someone believed me without hesitation. I told the lawyer everything, the missing dollars, the manipulated hours, the withheld tips, the fear we felt. She asked for copies of all my records, every spreadsheet, every note. I spent that night scanning, copying, and organizing, turning my chaotic binder into a professional case file. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at work became tense. Mr. Randall had noticed some of us whispering in the break room. He started assigning shifts more strictly, watching us like hawks. He made subtle threats, saying, "Be careful what you wish for." But the fear that once controlled me had faded. I kept thinking about my kids. I kept thinking about the nights we went to bed hungry or cold. And I remembered the moment that had started it all, the missing dollar. If I could fight for them, I could fight for anyone who had ever been cheated. The courage I felt was not sudden. It was built from countless small moments, standing firm when a customer complained about a long wait, refusing to let a coworker take the blame for a minor mistake, holding my head high when Mr. Randall sneered. Each act, small as it seemed, became a brick in the wall of my determination. I also began documenting everything differently. I recorded conversations, where legal, took photos of schedules, and even kept informal logs of what was said in meetings. Every scrap of evidence mattered. Every detail became ammunition. One particularly rough day, I returned home exhausted and sat at the kitchen table with Caleb and Lily. They were doing homework, oblivious to the storm brewing in my life. I realized then that this fight wasn't just mine. It was theirs too. Every stolen dollar, every injustice, was a battle they were unknowingly fighting alongside me. That night, I whispered to them, "Mommy's going to make things right. I promise." They didn't fully understand, but I knew they felt it in my tone, the fire in my eyes. And that's when I realized, courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward despite it. And I was ready. By the end of that week, our group had a plan. We had evidence, allies, and legal guidance. We weren't going to confront Mr. Randall directly, not yet. First, we would prepare the strongest case possible, one that he could not ignore, one that would protect every worker who had been cheated. I felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. The path ahead was risky. We could lose our jobs, face retaliation, or worse. But the alternative, silence, continued theft, continued suffering, was no longer acceptable. For the first time in months, I felt empowered. The missing dollar had ignited a fire that nothing could extinguish. And that fire was about to change everything. The day we officially filed our complaint felt surreal. Months of meticulous preparation, sleepless nights, and whispered meetings had all led to this moment. I walked into the lawyer's office with my binder clutched tightly to my chest, my heart pounding. "This is it," I whispered to myself, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. "This is where it changes." The lawyer smiled at me reassuringly. "You've done everything right. You have evidence, witnesses, and credibility. Don't let fear stop you now." I nodded, but deep down, I knew fear was waiting for me like a shadow. What if they retaliated? What if I lost my job? What if they fought back harder than I anticipated? Back at the restaurant, things changed almost immediately. Mr. Randall was quieter than usual, but I could feel his eyes on me. The subtle threats became more frequent. "Careful, sweetheart. I wouldn't want anything to happen to your schedule." I kept my head down and continued working, but inside, I was ready. The day of the first deposition, I sat in a small conference room, the walls lined with law books and the hum of the air conditioning. My coworkers sat beside me, tense but resolute. For the first time, we were equal, not powerless employees, facing someone who had exploited us for years. The questions were exhausting, precise, and sometimes intimidating. I recounted hours, tips, and discrepancies. I spoke slowly, carefully, emphasizing facts without letting my emotions take over, though inside, I was boiling. Every stolen dollar flashed in my mind, every night my kids went without flashed in my mind, and I felt a surge of righteous fury. The courtroom battle was grueling. Mr. Randall hired a lawyer who tried to discredit us at every turn. "They're just disgruntled employees," he said, looking for extra money. But I had prepared for that. Every spreadsheet, every record, every corroborating statement from coworkers was ready. I was armed with proof, and more importantly, with truth. I remember standing there, looking at the jury, my children's faces in my mind, and realizing that this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, fairness, and teaching my children that injustice must be confronted. The boss's smirks, the attempts to intimidate me, even the nights I lay awake wondering if we'd be retaliated against, they all lost their power over me that day. I had documented everything. I had witnesses. And I had courage that had been forged in months of struggle. One afternoon, after another long session of testimony, I walked out into the hallway and bumped into Maria. She gave me a shaky smile. "We're really doing this, huh?" she whispered. I nodded. "Yes. And we're winning." The settlement came weeks later. It wasn't just a victory, it was a vindication. All employees received back pay, including the missing dollars that had started this fire. Mr. Randall was required to implement transparent payroll systems, ensuring that future employees wouldn't suffer the same fate. When I held the first paycheck after the settlement, I stared at it in disbelief. It wasn't just numbers on paper, it was proof that courage, preparation, and persistence could beat exploitation. I bought groceries that week and didn't have to count pennies. I bought my kids small treats, watching their eyes light up as we celebrated a victory they didn't fully understand but felt deeply. Sitting in my apartment that night, I reflected on the journey. A missing dollar had seemed insignificant at first, almost laughable. But it had been the spark that ignited a fire in me, a fire that demanded justice, not just for me, but for everyone who had been ignored, undervalued, or taken advantage of. I realized then that the fight had changed me. I was no longer just a waitress, a single mother struggling to survive. I was a woman who had stood up, faced fear, and reclaimed her dignity. And I knew that courage, once discovered, could never be taken away. I thought about the message I wanted my children to carry into the world, that injustice must be confronted. That your voice matters, even when it trembles. That a single dollar, or a single act of dishonesty, is never too small to fight against. And that's the lesson I now carry with me. Sometimes, the smallest things can spark the greatest change. One missing dollar became a story of courage, justice, and the kind of resilience I never knew I had. The first morning after the settlement, I woke up feeling lighter. Not because the bills were magically gone, or because life was suddenly easy, but because the weight I had carried for months, maybe years, had finally lifted. That missing dollar, the spark that had started it all, had grown into something far greater, justice. I walked into the kitchen and found Caleb and Lily at the table, coloring and laughing. I handed them each a small treat, a candy bar, something we hadn't bought in months, and watched their faces light up. The smallest things suddenly felt enormous, because I had fought for them, and I had won. The victory was more than financial. It was personal. Every sleepless night, every whispered conversation with coworkers, every fearful heartbeat had led to this moment. I had proven to myself, and to the world, that even when you feel powerless, you have a voice, and you can use it. I also realized that courage isn't a single act. It's a habit, a practice, a daily decision to stand up for yourself and for others. And while this fight had been exhausting, terrifying, and emotionally draining, it had also been transformative. I met with my coworkers one last time before returning to normal life. We sat around a small table in a cafe, sipping coffee and smiling. Some had tears in their eyes. We talked about the months of fear, the nights of planning, and the joy of seeing justice served. And we laughed, a little shakily, but genuinely, at the fact that it had all started with a single dollar. "I never thought it would go this far," Maria said softly, shaking her head. "But we did it." I smiled at her. We didn't just get paid what we were owed. We took back our dignity. At home, I looked at my kids and thought about the lesson I had just taught them: courage matters. Persistence matters. Justice is worth fighting for, no matter how small the spark that starts the fire. I also thought about the broader world. There are countless people, women and men, mothers and fathers, students and workers, who face small, silent injustices every day. They think, it's just a few dollars, or, I'm just one person. But I learned that the smallest sparks can ignite the strongest fires. The key is noticing them, refusing to ignore them, and taking action with courage and strategy. Sometimes, when I pass by the restaurant where it all began, I feel a strange sense of closure. The place is unchanged, red booths, sticky menus, the same hum of activity, but I am different. I am no longer someone who accepts injustice silently. I am someone who knows her worth, who knows her rights, and who will never again allow herself or her family to be cheated. Looking back, that missing dollar feels less like a loss and more like a gift. It woke me up. It forced me to see the truth. It made me stronger than I knew I could be. And most importantly, it taught my children that fairness and courage are not just words, they are actions. So if you're listening to this story, I want you to remember this. It's never just a dollar when it affects your life, your dignity, or the people who depend on you. Stand up. Speak out. Fight for what is right. You may feel small, powerless, or afraid. But the smallest spark, like a missing dollar, can ignite a fire that changes everything. And once that fire is lit, nothing can stop it.